And we are back. Very many thanks for choosing to stay with us. Right about now, it's time for the long-awaited Gold Conversation. And we have the distinct honor of being joined by Charlene Ruto, who is the founder and patron of SMARCS Foundation. We also do have with us Anita Soina, who's the founder of the Soina Foundation. And also we do have Brian Maina, who is the founder and CSO, Eco Rafiki Africa. Thank you so very much for making time, being with us today to talk about all matters climate. We are ready to take it all in, all right? So just to start with you, Charlene Ruto, besides being Charlene, you also wear the title Mama Bees very passionately, and you're also a farmer, and you're very active when it comes to fighting for the climate. Please give us more insight on what motivated you to get into that space as a young person.
Thank you so much for having us on this show. I've been watching this show regularly every now and then, and I really like the content. And I think for me, I've come from an agricultural background. I've always grown up knowing about the farm life. I joke to people that every Easter and Christmas, my parents would insist, lazima tuende ushago. And at that time, I didn't appreciate it. I didn't want to go. But now, like 20-something years later, I totally appreciate that seed that was planted at that time. So on our farm, we started doing beekeeping, but more for pollination services, because the farm was so vast. And actually, when you have bees on your farm, it increases your production by 30%. But as I looked at it, I started looking at it from an agribusiness perspective. This was about a year ago. And I realized the potential that beekeeping has even as a business, and as well the community initiatives that can come from it. Because once I became serious about my beekeeping, I realized I need to talk to my neighbors so that we all have the same practices, we are all doing the same things to encourage a good environment for our bees to thrive. So that's why I became so passionate about beekeeping and the whole farming.
Now that you deeply understand the importance of beekeeping, are you trying to create more awareness because it's a space that has not fully been ventured into?
Yes, I must say there are a lot of still challenges, potholes when it comes to the beekeeping industry. Quite an amount of our honey in Kenya has been banned from some countries because of the level of pesticide in our honey. So that reduces the market for our beekeepers. And so there's so many challenges, but what we're doing, especially through SMARCS Foundation, so I look at beekeeping as a business, but I also look at it as a community initiative. And so through SMARCS Foundation, we're doing more beekeeping training because we have a lot of indigenous beekeepers. They do beekeeping so well. Because the thing with beekeeping, even if you do it as a business, you have to first love the bees. Like ever since I started doing beekeeping, anywhere I see a plant, I can easily identify the bees that are visiting that plant or that flower to get nectar or pollen. So once you have the love for bees, then you're able to develop quickly into seeing what are the different avenues. So there's the beekeeping training, there's constructing beehives as well. There are people in Kenya who even do pollination services. So I could take my bees, my hives from where I put them and transport them to a farm that actually needs pollination services, and that alone is another avenue of business for beekeeping.
All right. Thank you so very much for that. Now moving to you, Anita, you're very passionate on conversations that have to do with climate, SDGs, and you also recently received your award from Arusha when it comes to environment conservation, so good job on that. Maybe you can tell us, as a young person who's been very passionate and at the forefront for fighting for our climate, what are some of the challenges that you face?
So one thing I can say is that before we speak about the challenges, it's good to say that there are good opportunities in this space. And when I got to this space, I was just doing it. I was just planting trees and feeling good about it. I planted trees with my friends today. I'm back to the hostel and I think I'm happy. But then with time, it came with its own opportunities. But one thing I can say, as someone who focuses more on advocacy, the challenge is usually getting the target audience, which in this case is the community members and the young people. And you realize that the tough language of conservation itself is not really friendly. So we have to make sure that we are putting the language in a simple way and in an appealing way that, and just what Charlene does with farming, telling people that ukulima si ushamba, you know, it's the same thing with conservation. You have to find the best way for people to understand how they can join the space. Another thing is most of the time, I mean, we have not been made to love this from a young age for conservation. So it's hard when you finding a youth who's already older to understand, so what's in for me? Sometimes you tell somebody I do it out of passion, not because I get paid out of it, but for them it's what's in for me. So I can say that's one of the biggest challenges, but there are equally there are opportunities in this space.
All right, we'll be getting into the opportunities shortly, but just to move to Brian, the only gentleman on our set today. How are you doing?
Doing good, thank you.
You feel good?
Thank you for having me.
All right, now there's someone who's watching us right now and wants to get a hang of this conversation when we're talking about climate change and sustainability. Being someone who's very heavily invested in that space, please make it clear for them on what we are talking about when it comes to moving to a cleaner and green environment and also sustainability.
Oh, thank you so much. And again, thank you for having me. I think the conversation we're having is very timely, noting that we are having a discussion on one, SDGs, but also looking into what are these SDGs and why climate change per se. Climate change has been one of those discourses that we as young people have not had a chance to purely get into, understand, and I think that also the terminologies being used are quite heavy on the younger generation and also to the older generation. And so why is it important for we as young people to be here? One is because we are trying to transition completely as a continent, as a global sphere. We are looking at how then do we move from these old ways of doing things and purely transition to sustainable ways of making sure that the livelihoods of our people are impacted. And how then do we do this? We make very good, simple examples of saying, why do we want clean air? Is because the only way we can achieve it is by, one, introducing renewable energy, right? So we want to make sure that our people understand what are the effects of solar power, what are the effects of wind power. Also, some other effects that could also happen into our day-to-day activities. One of them is how we use our waste. So it's very important for us to reduce the amount of waste we're bringing into the society, but also minimizing the production rates. And by doing that, what we're trying to encourage people is to make sure that as you go into these productions, can we create alternatives to these waste that exist? One, being plastic. How then do we come up with innovative solutions such as what I'm doing, creating tableware that's made out of leaves to make sure that we are now removing the plastics that exist. And the last one is more or less, I would like to encourage the young people. You know, it's a space whereby you could get avenues to grow. And I like what Anita has said. When we speak about challenges, let's also speak about the opportunities that exist. We do understand there is fragmentation in terms of how we as young people, but also CSOs. You know, I hear people say the young people are not united. But then the question is the civil society united as well? No, we're not. So let's find ways to build engagement. But this is one of those avenues. Advocacy turns out to be how we push the change.
Thank you for that explanation. Now, something I've picked from Anita and Brian as well is that there's need to make this information digestible, especially to the younger generation, so they understand what we're talking about when it comes to climate change effects and sustainability. Now, Charlene, I've seen you work with a lot of schools and visit a lot of schools as well. What efforts are you putting in place to make sure that as you relay the message, it's in a digestible format for them?
I actually totally agree with what Brian is saying. The climate conversation, even till now, is still happening at a very high level. And we were at COP28 with both Anita and Brian. And something that immediately came to my mind is we need young people to start and continue attending these international platforms, because the more we are, the more we can fight for our space, the more we can fight for even our rural youth, because those are the ones who are most affected. Most of the schools I go to are in the rural areas. And yes, the kids understand the basics of tree planting, but now can we move the conversation, not just to tree planting, but tree growing? Because the percentage of the trees that survive after we do tree planting is less than 40%. And actually for this to be there for the next generations, we need to get more into tree growing. And something I like to say is, I say young people and not youth, because for us to have real impact, we must begin infecting the mindsets of young people from a very young age, that is from the age of 10 years and above. So I think if we, as young people, we engage from all levels. Brian does the same, Anita does the same, I do the same. We don't just attend international forums or local forums. We actually go to the grassroots and we do the tree growing, we do the different activities with the young people. We do a lot of knowledge engagement. So if we cut across the whole spectrum, I think that's when we'll really have massive impact.
All right. Now, you've talked about something very important, which is tree growing. Now, in November 13th, 2023, we did have the National Tree Planting Holiday, and we do have a target of about 15 billion trees by 2032. Anita, I'd like to ask you this question. How feasible is that target? And also, what more can we do to make sure that we hasten the climb towards that goal?
I mean, first of all, to just appreciate that currently we have political goodwill when it comes to climate. And even just before we had the National Tree Planting Day, immediately immediately we had the government, I remember the president and the CS, that is Soipan, talking to people that there are certificates for people to plant trees. I personally got a lot of messages from people telling me, nimepanda miti, nitafutie hiyo certificate yangu, just try and find my certificate somewhere. And so for me, this is, that showed that people are really going to do it just because it's coming from the top. That let's do this, so they will do it. So number one, that is very great because we have moved from a point of just relaxing and not planting at all to a point of planting. Now from that planting is where we pick up to start discussing the growth. If you looked at the statistics of the trees that were planted during that day alone, if we had that every month, for example, we'd have more trees. And remember, in this scenario, most young people who own tree nurseries came out in large numbers, donated trees, some sold, and all that. So I can say this is something very good. It also encourages the people in the space, because one thing I've realized, like one of the challenges that people who own nurseries, for example, face is that maybe they don't have market. But with the introduction of these days, then jobs, green jobs are being created. So yeah, it's, yeah.
So we're taking a break right now, but Brad, maybe you can just give me a figure. How many trees did you manage to plant during the National Tree Planting Holiday?
Oh, wow, I did about 100.
Great.
That's with my family.
Good job. All right, so for now, we are taking a short commercial break, but when we come back, we'd like to find out how are we involving the marginalized communities and also people with disabilities in this conversation on climate change. Do stick around for that. See you after the break.